The shuttle's engines hummed with a frequency that made Zara's chitinous exoskeleton vibrate uncomfortably. As a Caleth, she was used to the gentle thrumming of bioships, not the harsh mechanical roar of primitive fusion drives. She adjusted her translator implant and peered through the viewport at the approaching station, her compound eyes catching the brilliant starlight reflecting off the Academy's crystalline surface. Sunspire Academy hung in space like a magnificent crystalline flower, its 12 petals spreading outward from a central hub. Each petal housed different species' environmental needs: low-gravity sectors for the bird-like Athrans, high-pressure chambers for the aquatic Benfids, radiation-shielded zones for the silicone-based Corvins, and standard atmosphere zones for most others. It was the galaxy's most prestigious institution for training the next generation of galactic diplomats, scientists, and peacekeepers. Students came from across known space to study here, representing over 300 different species and subspecies. "Attention, passengers!" The pilot's voice crackled through the comm system, carrying an unusual tension that made Zara's antenna twitch. "We have a unique passenger manifest today. Please remain calm during docking procedures and follow all safety protocols." Zara's compound eyes swiveled toward the other passengers, noting the sudden shift in atmosphere. The usual mix of species filled the transport. A few nervous Centauri with their blue-tinged skin and gill slits fluttering anxiously, some Yillian scholars with their characteristic head tentacles twitching in thought, and a lone Corvin engineer whose rocky hide gleamed under the cabin lights. There was also a cluster of molluscoid students, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns of concern. "What do they mean by unique?" whispered Nex, a young Athran whose iridescent feathers ruffled with anxiety. His voice carried the high-pitched harmonics typical of his species when distressed. Before anyone could answer, the airlock hissed open with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet cabin. The source of the pilot's warning became immediately, terrifyingly clear. A human stepped aboard. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several passengers instinctively moved away from the newcomer, pressing themselves against the far walls of the shuttle. Others froze entirely, their bodies locking into defensive postures honed by millions of years of evolution. Zara felt her own survival instincts screaming at her to flee, every fiber of her being recognizing the presence of an apex predator. Everything about the human screamed danger. The forward-facing eyes that marked it as a hunter, the dense bone structure visible beneath surprisingly thin skin, the way it moved with an economy of motion that spoke of barely contained violence. Its muscular frame was compact but powerful, and even its casual gait suggested the coiled potential of a striking serpent. "Hey, everyone," the human said casually, its voice carrying harmonics that made several translators spark. It seemed completely oblivious to the terror it was inspiring. "Name's Marcus Chen. Looking forward to studying with you all." Dean Vorth's bioluminescent tendrils curled nervously around his ceremonial staff as he addressed the assembled faculty in the Academy's central chamber. The ancient molluscoid administrator had run Sunspire Academy for over 2 centuries, weathering political upheavals, species conflicts, and academic crises that would have broken lesser beings. Yet nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for this particular moment. "Colleagues," he began, his voice carrying the weight of his years as it translated into dozens of languages simultaneously through the chamber's quantum resonance field. "As you know, the Galactic Council has mandated that we accept our first Deathworlder student." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several faculty members shifted uncomfortably in their specialized seating arrangements, while others began unconscious defensive posturing. Professor Kine, the distinguished Yillian head of zoonobiology, raised one of her primary tentacles. Her normally vibrant skin had paled to an alarming shade of gray. "With respect, Dean, are we absolutely certain this course of action is wise? Humans originate from a Class 12 death world. According to our zoonobiological classifications, they're essentially evolved apex predators, practically walking weapons wrapped in diplomatic protocols. The empirical data strongly supports this grave concern, added Dr. Zilch, the Centauri mathematics instructor, his gill slits fluttering rapidly with agitation. Human homeworld statistics are genuinely terrifying from any reasonable perspective. Gravitational force 1.2 times galactic standard. Atmospheric oxygen concentrations that would prove lethally toxic to most known species, and meteorological patterns that routinely include frozen precipitation, electromagnetic storms, and seismic activity. The fact that they evolved sapience under such apocalyptic conditions defies all known evolutionary models. Dean Vorth's tendrils tightened around his staff until the ancient metal groaned under the pressure. Nevertheless, the human governmental entity has formally agreed to join the Galactic Alliance, and the binding terms of that agreement explicitly include comprehensive educational exchange programs. This particular specimen, Marcus Chen, has scored exceptionally well on all standardized aptitude assessments, despite originating from those nightmarish environmental conditions. The faculty chamber fell into an oppressive silence. Through the transparent aluminum viewing ports, they could observe the human transport vessel approaching with mechanical precision. Even from this considerable distance, the primitive and alarming nature of human technology was readily apparent. Crude chemical propulsion systems, basic metal hull construction, and what appeared to be actual transparent barriers instead of proper energy containment fields. What specific safety measures have been implemented? Asked Professor Yan, the massive Corvin geology instructor, her rocky voice rumbling with barely concealed anxiety. Standard diplomatic immunity protocols, Dean Vorth replied reluctantly, his tendrils dimming with resignation. We cannot legally restrict the human's movement or activities beyond what we would apply to any other student, despite the unprecedented circumstances. The orientation hall had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate various species' complex physiological needs. Atmospheric processors hummed constantly in the background, their quantum filters maintaining dozens of precisely calibrated microclimates within the same space. Temperature gradients shifted seamlessly from the sub-zero conditions preferred by the crystalline Vorthak to the scorching heat required by the silicon-based pyroids. Marcus Chen sat in what had been specifically designated the standard atmosphere section, completely unaware that the entire environmental zone had been specifically calibrated to accommodate his lethal oxygen requirements. Zara watched from 3 rows back, her compound eyes tracking every micro-movement, while her translator worked overtime to process Dean Vorth's multilingual welcome speech. She couldn't shake the overwhelming sensation that she was sharing space with something profoundly, primordially dangerous. The human sat with deceptive casualness, occasionally stretching in ways that displayed the horrifying efficiency of its predatory musculature. Even its relaxed posture suggested a coiled spring ready to unleash devastating violence at a moment's notice. "Welcome, students, to Sunspire Academy," Dean Vorth intoned, his bioluminescent patterns shifting through formal greeting configurations. "Here, you will study alongside beings from across the known galaxy, learning the sophisticated arts of diplomacy, xenoscience, and peaceful coexistence among disparate species." During the scheduled intermission, several students approached Marcus. Whether driven by scientific curiosity, youthful bravado, or some deeply misguided sense of diplomatic obligation, Zara couldn't determine. She watched with mounting fascination and horror as the interactions unfolded. "So," said Yex, a young Centauri whose gill slits fluttered nervously, "is it actually true that your homeworld experiences storms composed entirely of frozen water crystals?" Marcus laughed, a sound that made several nearby students flinch involuntarily and caused 2 translation devices to emit warning sparks. "You mean snow?" Yeah, absolutely love it actually. Perfect conditions for skiing and snowboarding. Skiing? Nex asked, his iridescent feathers practically vibrating with confused terror. You deliberately strap long composite boards to your feet and intentionally hurl yourself down steep mountain slopes covered in frozen precipitation? Marcus explained with genuine enthusiasm, apparently oblivious to the growing horror spreading across his audience's faces. Purely for recreational entertainment. The silence that followed was so complete that the atmospheric processors seemed to roar by comparison. The concept of voluntarily launching oneself down a mountain covered in lethal frozen water for fun was so fundamentally alien that several advanced translation devices began smoking from computational overload. What about the apex predators? Zara found herself asking, surprising herself by actually vocalizing her terror. Oh, most of the big ones are pretty rare nowadays. Occasionally you might encounter a grizzly bear or mountain lion, but they usually leave you alone if you make enough noise and avoid surprising them. The casual way Marcus referred to creatures capable of killing him as merely leaving him alone sent ice-cold chills through every assembled student. Coach Wren had trained elite athletes from 47 different species during his distinguished career at Sunspire Academy. The massive Corvin prided himself on his unparalleled ability to design comprehensive fitness programs that challenged any being while meticulously respecting their unique biological limitations and evolutionary adaptations. His coaching philosophy had been tested by everything from zero-gravity dancers to high-pressure deep-sea swimmers. He had never encountered a physiological problem he couldn't solve with proper application of advanced sports science and xenobiology. Marcus Chen was about to fundamentally shatter that confidence. Standard physical assessment protocols, Coach Wren rumbled, his rocky hide gleaming under the gymnasium's full-spectrum lighting array, will commence with basic mobility and coordination tests. The gymnasium represented a marvel of galactic engineering. Anti-gravity field generators for species requiring low-G environments, reinforced titanium composite floors rated for heavy worlders, atmospheric processing zones maintaining dozens of different breathing mixtures, and kinetic dampening fields to prevent injury during high-impact activities. It was a testament to technological achievement that allowed beings with radically different physiologies to exercise together in complete safety. Marcus stepped up to the first station, a seemingly simple agility course designed to test reflexes, coordination, and spatial awareness. The current record holder was a Yillian student who had completed the complex obstacle sequence in an impressive 2.3 standard minutes, a feat that had stood unchallenged for 3 academic cycles. Marcus finished in 37 seconds. Equipment malfunction, Coach Wren muttered, frantically checking his precision chronometer with increasing desperation. Reset the entire course immediately. The second attempt yielded an even more impossible result, 34 seconds. By now, every other student had completely abandoned their own assessments to watch in stunned silence. Zara observed from the sidelines as Marcus moved through obstacles that would challenge a professionally trained athlete with fluid, almost supernatural grace. His movements weren't merely fast, they demonstrated an efficiency that spoke of a species forged by relentless evolutionary pressure and constant mortal danger. Strength assessment next, Coach Wren announced, his voice carrying barely concealed panic as he struggled to maintain his professional composure. The gravity-resistant weight system utilized quantum field manipulation to provide equivalent resistance regardless of a being's homeworld gravitational conditions. The previous record holder, a Corvin engineering student built like a living boulder, had managed an astounding 847 standard resistance units. Marcus, treating it as a casual warm-up exercise, effortlessly lifted 1,200 units. Perhaps we should try the endurance assessment instead, Coach Wren suggested weakly, his rocky exterior visibly trembling with existential dread. Professor Kane's xenobiology lecture was typically one of the more intellectually relaxed and contemplative classes at Sunspire Academy. Students would immerse themselves in learning about the fascinating diversity of life throughout the galaxy, marveling at the extraordinary adaptations that billions of years of evolution had produced on countless different worlds. The curriculum covered everything from crystalline life forms that fed on stellar radiation to methane-breathing organisms that thrived in the frozen outer reaches of gas giant atmospheres. Today's comprehensive lesson on predator-prey evolutionary relationships had taken an unexpectedly horrifying turn. The fundamental key to understanding any ecosystem, Professor Kane explained with academic precision, her head tentacles weaving complex mathematical patterns as she spoke, is recognizing the delicate balance between hunter and hunted. On most civilized worlds, predators are highly specialized evolutionary products, targeting specific prey species with precise, narrowly focused adaptations developed over millions of years. A curious student raised a manipulator appendage from the back of the lecture hall. "What about persistence hunters, Professor? We've heard references to this hunting strategy in some of the more disturbing xenobiological literature." "Ah, yes," Professor Kane replied, her skin patterns shifting to display academic discomfort. "Persistence hunting represents an extremely rare and frankly nightmarish evolutionary strategy, found only on the most hostile and unforgiving death worlds. The predator doesn't rely on superior speed, overwhelming strength, or specialized weaponry, but rather on psychological and physical exhaustion. They simply never stop relentlessly chasing their prey until it literally collapses from complete fatigue and terror." Marcus casually raised his hand with characteristic human directness. "That's exactly how my ancestors hunted, actually. All humans evolved as persistence hunters." The classroom fell into an absolute, tomb-like silence. Professor Kane's tentacles stopped their graceful movements entirely, freezing in mid-gesture like a statue. "I'm sorry, could you please repeat that statement?" the professor asked very carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters," Marcus explained with cheerful enthusiasm, apparently completely oblivious to the growing existential horror spreading throughout the room like a plague. "We'd just jog after large prey animals for hours, sometimes entire days, until they literally couldn't run anymore. Our whole anatomical body plan is specifically designed for it. Incredibly efficient cooling through perspiration, spring-loaded leg tendons, cardiovascular systems that never quit." Zara felt her exoskeleton crawling with primitive terror as the implications sank in. Humans weren't just predators, they were the kind of predator that featured in evolutionary nightmares. That's completely impossible," whispered a Centauri student. "Nothing in the known galaxy hunts like that." "Well, we don't really do it anymore," Marcus added helpfully. "We've got supermarkets now." The emergency alarm echoed through Sunspire Academy's labyrinthine corridors at precisely 0347 station time, its piercing wail designed to penetrate even the most specialized hearing organs across dozens of species. Students stumbled from their environmentally controlled dormitories in various states of confusion and panic as the Academy's emergency lighting system cast everything in harsh crimson illumination that made even familiar hallways seem alien and threatening. "This is not a drill," Dean Vorth's voice crackled through the Academy's quantum communication network, his normally calm administrative tone edged with genuine urgency. "All students and faculty must proceed to designated safe zones immediately. Follow established emergency protocols without deviation." Zara's compound eyes rapidly adjusted to the emergency lighting conditions as she joined the steady stream of students moving through the corridors toward the central safe zones. Her natural prey instincts were screaming danger signals, but years of academic training helped her maintain composure. The cause of the academy-wide alarm became apparent as they navigated through the main thoroughfares. A section of the Academy's outer defensive hull had sustained significant damage from an unexpected micrometeorite impact, causing catastrophic atmospheric breach in the prestigious Botanical Research Wing, where Professor Jan's team studied rare plant specimens from across the galaxy. The emergency situation was serious, but not entirely unprecedented in space-based installations. Sunspire Academy's comprehensive safety protocols were legendary throughout the galactic education system, refined through centuries of operation and countless emergency drills. The atmospheric breach would be contained within hours using standard containment procedures, and repairs would commence immediately. What absolutely no one had anticipated was how the human would react to mortal danger. While other students moved in orderly, disciplined fashion toward the designated safe zones, following billions of years of evolutionary programming that screamed "flee from danger," Marcus Chen was moving in the completely opposite direction, toward the breach. "Hey!" Zara called out, breaking from the crowd despite every instinct telling her to seek safety. "Where are you going? The safe zones are this way." Marcus turned, and for the first time since meeting him, Zara saw something fundamentally different from casual friendliness in his expression. His forward-facing predator eyes held a laser focus that made her exoskeleton prickle with primordial alarm signals. "Someone's trapped in the botanical section," he said with absolute certainty. "I heard them calling for help." "That's completely impossible," Zara replied, her voice shaking. "The emergency sensors would have detected anyone in the breach zone." "I heard them," Marcus repeated with terrifying conviction, and something in his tone convinced her he was telling the truth. The human disappeared into the damaged section, moving toward the very danger that every other living being was desperately fleeing from. 23 minutes later, Marcus Chen emerged from the breach zone, carrying Professor Jan's research assistant, a young molluscoid named Keel, who had been trapped when the catastrophic atmospheric containment failure occurred. The student was unconscious, but miraculously alive, having survived in the lethal thin atmosphere only because Marcus had reached them with impossible speed and determination. The rescue should have been absolutely impossible by every known law of xenobiology and physics. The damaged section had lost complete atmospheric pressure, the temperature had plummeted to near absolute zero, and the area was filled with razor-sharp debris from the hull breach. Any normal galactic citizen would have died within minutes of exposure to such apocalyptic conditions. Marcus had not only survived, but had navigated the treacherous debris field, located the trapped student using senses that apparently exceeded their most advanced detection equipment, and carried them to safety, all while holding his breath in a vacuum that would have instantly killed most species. How? Dean Vorth asked in stunned disbelief, as the Academy's emergency medical team took charge of the rescued student, their instruments confirming that Keel would make a full recovery. Marcus shrugged with characteristic human nonchalance, apparently none the worse for his harrowing ordeal. "Humans can hold their breath for a pretty long time if we absolutely have to. And the cold wasn't that bad, honestly felt kind of like winter back home in Minnesota." The gathered faculty and students stared at him in a complex mixture of awe, terror, and profound confusion. Here was a being so incredibly hardy that environmental conditions which would kill most galactic species within moments were merely uncomfortable inconveniences to him. Yet he had used that incomprehensible resilience not for conquest, violence, or personal gain, but to save a fellow student he barely knew. Zara watched as the human was escorted to the medical bay for mandatory examination, a precaution that proved completely unnecessary as comprehensive scans showed no signs of injury, distress, or even mild discomfort from his impossible ordeal. Around her, she could hear the whispered conversations of other students, their voices filled with the same bewildering confusion she felt. "He saved Keel's life," someone murmured in amazement. "Did you see how he moved through that debris field? Like it was absolutely nothing. I heard humans call their homeworld Earth. Apparently it literally means dirt in their primitive language. They named their entire planet after soil." As the emergency lighting faded and normal illumination returned to the Academy corridors, Zara realized that everything she thought she understood about predators and prey about strength and danger, about the fundamental nature of power itself, had been completely shattered and reformed. The human wasn't just a Deathworlder, he was something far more complex and terrifying than she had ever imagined. He was a Deathworlder who deliberately chose to be gentle. Zara watched as the human was escorted to the medical bay for mandatory examination, a precaution that proved completely unnecessary as comprehensive scans showed no signs of injury, distress, or even mild discomfort from his impossible ordeal. Around her, she could hear the whispered conversations of other students, their voices filled with the same bewildering confusion she felt. "He saved Keel's life," someone murmured in amazement. "Did you see how he moved through that debris field? Like it was absolutely nothing." "I heard humans call their homeworld Earth. Apparently it literally means dirt in their primitive language. They named their entire planet after soil." As the emergency lighting faded and normal illumination returned to the academy corridors, Zara realized that everything she thought she understood about predators and prey, about strength and danger, about the fundamental nature of power itself, had been completely shattered and reformed. The human wasn't just a Deathworlder, he was something far more complex and terrifying than she had ever imagined. He was a Deathworlder who deliberately chose to be gentle.